Hello and welcome to the Non-Perfect Parents Club podcast. I'm Emma, a mama of two girls, an ex-nursery practitioner and the creator of the Non-Perfect Parents Club. The Non-Perfect Parents Club is all about support, honesty, truths, acknowledging that none of us can be perfect parents because it's impossible, and basically just speaking the unspoken. The only rule here is no judgment allowed. I love hearing people's stories. I love finding out about other parents, their family dynamics, their values, and how they tick. So that is what this podcast is going to be. Some great honest conversations about parenting, hopefully delving into some nitty-gritty thoughts and feelings that will make us all laugh, cry, and sigh a big sigh of relief. Hello and welcome back to the Non-Perfect Parents Club podcast. Today I'm joined by Hayley, mum of three and Instagrammer Sparkles and Stretch Marks. Hi Hayley and welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me. So, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your family dynamic and any heritage.
Okay, my name's Hayley. I am 41. And I'm from Liverpool originally. I've lived in Devon for the last 15 years. I live with my partner, John, and we've got three children. We home educate, always kind of have done. One of my children identifies as transgender, and I run a blog called Sparkles and Stretch Marks, which I started when I just had my first baby. Kind of just as a bit of, I've always loved writing, so it was just kind of a little hobby to kind of keep me busy through the pregnancy. And it turned into a bit of a thing that I've kind of carried on doing. I blog about mental health, motherhood, raising a trans child, kind of whatever has kind of naturally come up as I've kind of gone through the parenting journey. We're a white British family, and that's basically it.
Can I just say, I'm like totally fangirling right now because I've followed you for so long. So I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. Okay, so the main rule of the Non-Perfect Parents Club is no judgment allowed. Have you ever felt judged in your parenting, and can you tell us about it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I would say that judgment has kind of been a main theme kind of throughout my motherhood experience in lots of different ways, like almost so many ways that I don't even know how many of them to go into. I think I kind of first felt that I experienced it kind of very early on, really, possibly even in pregnancy.
Right.
I tend to naturally always be kind of drawn to doing things that are just a little bit outside of the box, a bit outside of the kind of norm. And I don't really know why that is, but it's just always kind of been that way. So like, for example, we home educate. That's something that I always kind of knew that I wanted to do. And it's something that, rightly or wrongly, people do tend to judge, and that you have to explain yourself about. Like the same with when my daughter told us that she was transgender. She was very young. So that's something that we faced a lot of judgment for as well, because we decided that we were going to affirm her and support her through it. And it's been a bit of a weird one. I feel like there have been lots of things that have kind of come up as I've kind of gone through my kind of motherhood journey that have kind of put us in the kind of the spotlight for a lot of judgment. And I know it sounds really, really cheesy, but I heard a saying once, which was that the children who are meant for us are sent to us. And I'm not particularly a religious person or anything, but I do think that that is quite kind of apt. And I think that part of the experience for me is growing up, I was terrified of being judged. I've always been such a people pleaser. I've never liked to kind of stick my head above the parapet. I want to kind of keep myself to myself all the time. I don't want to kind of have eyes on me. And I kind of have been sent these children who to do the opposite of that. Like, and I think it's helped me to grow as a person, like massively, because if you're going to kind of stand up and advocate for anyone, it's going to be your kids, isn't it? Like that's going to force you. So definitely judgment is something that I've experienced a lot of. And again, like with blogging, like naturally, as a blogger, as somebody who kind of has some followers on the internet, you do kind of open yourself up to being trolled, to being judged. There's always going to be people who don't agree with things that you do or the way that you do them, and often they'll be very, very vocal about it. So the judgment has been pretty constant, pretty consistent throughout, really.
Right. Yeah. So what is there anything that you would say to another parent that sort of is still like quite conscious of being judged? What would you say to them in terms of, you know, maybe not advice, but do you know what I mean? Like as if you were just chatting and someone was like, oh, I'm being judged. What would you say?
I think the thing to try and remember, although I know it's always easier said than done, is that no matter what you do in your life, someone will always have a problem with it. You're never going to please all of the people all of the time. So the main people as a parent that you need to please are you and your kids. And as long as you and your kids are happy and content and, you know, enjoying your life and your experience, then that is the only thing that you need to concern yourself with. Everything else is just background noise, and it needs to just be tuned out as best as you can.
Yeah. Okay. How do you feel about parenting? Good, bad? Has it changed you? Any regrets?
Oh wow, that's such a big isn't it?
Everyone always says that.
So can you say it again? So any regrets?
Yeah.
And how has it changed?
So how do you feel about parenting? Good, bad? Has it changed you? And do you have any regrets?
Okay. I definitely have regrets. Like,
okay.
I don't think I would believe anyone if they said that they didn't have regrets.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I'm a massive overthinker, like huge. So everything that I do is always, you know, it's something that I would have kind of had sleepless nights over, like always, like, and especially to do with the kids. Like, there's a lot of things that I would kind of do differently now. I think one thing that really stands out to me as well is, even though my oldest child is only 10, I don't feel like I'm the same person now as I was when he was born. Like, and I feel like some of the choices that I made in those kind of early years, not necessarily things that I would do the same way now, but it's all part of life, isn't it? And growing, and like your experiences kind of colour who you are. So I think that although there are things I regret, would I change them? I'm not necessarily sure that I would, because they wouldn't lead to the same place. How I feel about parenting, I feel as though, obviously, there's so much good about being a parent, and I would never change it. And I feel so lucky to have got to experience it. But I do feel that I wasn't ever fully aware of just how all-consuming it can be, of how difficult it can be, of how much you can kind of lose yourself in motherhood. You hear kind of little bits of people talking a little bit about these things, but it feels like it's quite taboo. And it's never really, I don't think I would have ever been able to grasp just how like all-consuming it actually is, and how sometimes I feel like I don't actually have the capacity for it, like to be the mother that I want to be all of the time. Like, and then you've got the guilt that goes along with that, and the question of yourself. It's I love it, but it's a lot harder than I ever thought it could possibly be.
It's intense, isn't it? Okay. Is there anything in your life that has shaped how you parent that you're happy to talk about? Any situations or circumstances that have affected this?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of things. So the first thing that comes to mind is I was quite a kind of, I wouldn't say unhappy child, but I was a very nervous child. I was a very emotional child. And I kind of spent my whole life from a very young age, kind of all the way through, feeling that I didn't really fit in anywhere, feeling that I was kind of too much for people. I'm going through an autism diagnosis at the moment, which has come about because my children are going through autism diagnoses, and I've been kind of looking into what autism is and how it can present in different ways. And in doing that, I kind of recognized a lot of those traits in myself from my childhood. And now that I'm looking back on my childhood with that knowledge and realizing that I was probably an autistic child trying to fit into neurotypical settings and trying to, you know, mask and make myself appear as neurotypical as I could. Everything kind of feels different now. And I think that has kind of really shaped how I am as a mother, because I felt so strongly that I didn't fit in, and that it really affected my confidence, and that had a knock-on effect throughout so many different aspects of my life that I was really just, I didn't want my kids to have to experience that and go through that. So my son started school as normal, like at 5 with everybody else, and immediately it wasn't a good fit for him at all. Like he really didn't settle. He just really struggled, and it reminded me a lot of how I used to be, like at school. So instead of kind of pushing him with it and kind of insisting that we carry it on, I took him out, and as it turns out, now he is going through an autism diagnosis. So I think that my instinct on that was kind of right. But it's definitely being shaped by my own experiences. Like, so the choices that I make are based on things that kind of went wrong in my childhood, I would say.
So I was going to say something then and I've forgotten it. I do this all the time. Because that's like, I don't think brave is particularly the right word, but that's the only one that's coming to mind at the minute. But for you to put him into school and then to pull him out, like that's something that I know from like speaking to a lot of parents I do, that most people would just keep their child in mainstream school, and they wouldn't maybe have the, I can't think what the word is, but the thing to take them out and do home ed. But that's obviously shaped from your experience, and like you said, you've trusted your instinct, which I think is something so important as a parent. And that's something that we're kind of conditioned, maybe not conditioned, but we're quite often encouraged to ignore, I find. And there's quite a lot of times where our instinct is screaming at us and we ignore it because we're like, oh no, we can't do that, or we shouldn't do that. So I just kind of wanted to point out there that for you to do that, that's like quite a big thing, isn't it? And it's something that
I totally know what you mean. I think we're so often told, aren't we, as mothers, follow your instinct, like mother's instinct is like the best thing. But that's not reflected in the way society kind of treats us. Like, it's kind of like they say it, but they don't really mean it. You're supposed to go and do it. Like, if like in that situation, like what everyone expected me to do was just to keep going and just, keep pushing. And he needs to learn some independence, and he'll be fine. You just need to let him get used to it. And that overriding feeling of like, but I don't want him to get used to being traumatized. Like, it's traumatizing him. He is beside himself. He can't sleep of a night. Like, that's not normal for a 5-year-old child, and nobody's thinking about the effect that's going to have like further down the line. But that's all I could think about, because I knew what that looked like. Like, I could kind of see ahead to how that played out for me. And I don't necessarily think it was bravery, because I was terrified. Like, and I've kind of been terrified ever since that, or what if it's the wrong choice? What if they're going to what if when they're older, they're going to resent me for that? Like, maybe they're going to think that I've kept them in. But you can only do what feels right in the moment, can't you? And hope that is what is the right thing. So
okay. What is your biggest value when it comes to parenting?
Oh, my biggest value, I think, is, I don't really know how to word it as a value, but it's just not to kind of look down on the kids because they're kids. Like, I know that a lot of people have the opinion that, you shouldn't be friends with your kids, you should be a parent to your kids. And I've never really gone along with that. Like, I think that to me, the most important thing is to build a connection and to have trust, and for it to be a really open, honest, kind of authentic relationship where they can say anything that they need to say to me, and I'm not ever going to pull the, you know, the hierarchy of like the mother kind of card. Like, I want it to be a very open dialogue in our house. I want us to be able to have conversations about anything that might feel difficult. Again, it's kind of the opposite to how I was brought up. There was a lot of things that were off the table, like with the way that I was raised. Like, for example, you know, conversations about period, sex, that kind of thing. It was just like a complete no-go. Like, it just wasn't like anything that we could discuss. And I don't want that. I want me and my kids to have a very open communication about anything. And I'd say that is the main theme that I've tried to kind of keep throughout kind of my relationship with all of my kids, just honesty and openness and connection above everything else, really. So I'd say that was the value, connection.
That was my value too. I did on the first episode, my friend interviewed me, and connection's one of my values as well, because I always think at the root of everything, if you've got that connection with your kids, it doesn't matter what happens, you can get through it, can't you? And if as long as you've got that connection, they know that they can always come back to you when they need to.
That's exactly it. And I feel like the way that I was brought up, it was more about like respect. Like, you had to, everything was from like a value, a place of having to respect your parents. And actually what that did was, like, if I was ever in a situation which was quite dangerous or difficult, I knew that my parent would see the situation I got myself into as a lack of respect, and I couldn't go to them and I couldn't be honest and open about what was happening. And so I feel like if you've got that connection, everything else is going to hopefully just fall into place around it.
Yeah, hopefully. What has been your biggest challenge so far?
Oh, okay. There's three things coming into my head. I'm trying to pick which has been the biggest. So I mean, I'm thinking of like home educating has been a massive challenge. Like, my kids going through autism diagnoses has been a massive challenge. Doing that at the same time as going through it myself, and my partner was diagnosed years ago. That's been a huge challenge. But I think the biggest one has definitely been my daughter and her gender identity. Because it's just so far out of my comfort zone, so far out of my own experience. Like, she's the only transgender person I've ever met. Like, well, not now, but at the time when we realized, she was the only transgender person I'd ever known. Like, I had no experience of it at all. I felt like we were just stumbling around in the dark, not knowing what to do, really kind of worrying about what the best way to handle the situation was, not wanting to think wrong, that was going to kind of affect her. But also, it's hard to explain it, but I felt like we were suddenly kind of just thrust into this whole new world that we had no knowledge of at all, and everybody's eyes were on us as like how we would deal with it. So for somebody who is such a chronic people pleaser like me, like to have to go to my family and explain, right, this child that you've always known as a boy is actually a girl, and you have to change the pronouns, and this is what we're going to do, and have to be that person that's going to advocate for that. It's so out of my comfort zone, like so far out of my comfort zone. It was just, that was definitely the biggest, most hard that I've ever had to go through. And it kind of still is, because even though it's been 5 years, it's always changing. Like, there's always new kind of aspects of it that are coming in. And I feel like I've got to be this kind of advocate for her and her needs and her rights, and that's going to stay the same, I think, throughout her whole life. And it kind of means that I don't get to just kind of blend into the background and not get involved in things anymore. Like, I have to be part of this like really difficult conversation, and I have to step up, and that doesn't come all that naturally to me. So that has definitely been a big
and it's because whilst it doesn't come naturally to you, obviously I've followed you on Instagram for a long time, so I've seen stories and your posts and stuff, and I really admire the way that you do advocate for it. And I've learned so much from your posts and the stuff that you've shared and stuff. And I just think the way that you've supported her right from the beginning, and I know that maybe sounds a little bit funny because when it's your children, you do just support them, don't you? But the thing I think is not everybody does. Not everyone would have done it in the way that you've done it. And I just, yeah, I really admire what you've done, and you've taught me a lot, and I'm sure there's lots of others of your followers that you, I guess, like you say, you didn't know anything about beforehand, and you've definitely opened my eyes up to a lot of things.
Thank you. That really means a lot. That's kind of all that I want to do is, at this point anyway, while she is so young, I just want to kind of make people think about it and understand, because it's something that we read about so often in, you know, the Daily Mail or, you know, on these kind of news stations, and it's always kind of these really sensationalist headlines, and everything is put across in such a frightening way. People think that their rights are being attacked and all the rest of it. Nobody ever thinks, when they're talking about the transgender kind of debate, nobody thinks of like a child. And of course, like, transgender people exist from childhood. Like, they don't just turn a switch on and be transgender as adults. Like, they've always been that way, perhaps weren't free to express it. And I don't think that people think about it because it's not something that we see, like, or hear or talk about enough. And that's why I think it's so important that people are aware of it. And so I feel like we have an opportunity to do that, to kind of be like, look, this is how it is. Like, this is not something that's scary. This is just, you know, it's quite natural. It doesn't need to be this whole big kind of, you know, issue. It's I just want people to kind of realize that.
Yeah, and it blows my mind with, like you said there, like there's people that don't feel like they can be free and be who they really are, and it's that to me is heartbreaking. Like, why would anybody put someone else through that? Like, you know what I mean? It just blows my mind.
So sad when you really think about it. We take my daughter to a group, like a support group for transgender people, and it's a group that's open to across the age spectrum. So some of the people that go there are in their kind of 60s and 70s, and they've just, in the last kind of 5 years or so, they've only just been able to come out as transgender. And they've lived their whole lives not being able to be who they actually are. And I find that the absolute saddest thing. And sometimes you see them looking at the children in the group, and kind of, you can kind of see the envy, like, naturally, like, they're looking at those children thinking, that's the freedom that I never had. This is like, you know, I would never have been able to say this to my mother, and even if I did, they wouldn't have accepted it. Like, it's so sad, and it just doesn't have to be that way. And until we open the conversation and start talking about it more, like, it's not going to change. Like,
and that's it. And it's like, it's opening them conversations with our children as well. Like, you know, for me to talk to my children about it, like, I just feel like the awareness, it shouldn't just be kept to, you know, like the families that are going through it. Everyone, if it post, like you're posting your stories with me, like, open up the conversations with my girls, and it's just making sure that acceptance spreads, and that it's not this thing where it has to be, you know, kept quiet and a taboo subject, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And that's something that I think people have a lot of fear of as well. Like, I think people tend to think if you teach your children about LGBTQ issues, then you're kind of going to make them gay or make them trans. Like, and I know it's like, it's a bit cheesy, but my analogy is always like, you read them the Gruffalo, they're not going to become the Gruffalo. I mean, like, it's not going to turn anybody gay. It's not going to turn anybody trans. But if that is already in them, it will make them feel like you are a safe person to be able to articulate that with. And that could be life-saving. And I just think it's so important.
Yeah. Okay, last question. What do you wish you could change about parenting in general, as for everyone?
Oh, that's a good one. I think one of the main things that I would like to change is that parenting, I think, especially in our society, is seen as such an individual kind of thing, where all of the responsibility of raising this whole human is on one or two people. And we kind of carry the weight of all of that. Like, so we kind of feel overwhelmed with guilt for every kind of what we see as like a shortfall in our parenting. We feel overwhelmed with guilt if we make like a decision that we think isn't like the perfect one. We feel guilty if we have to work. We feel guilty if we don't work. We feel guilty, you know, if we're with our kids all the time, if we're not with our kids all the time. There's so much guilt that goes through everything. And we're so often kind of consumed with worry about how are the kids going to end up in the future based on the decisions that we've made, which is such a huge weight to have on your shoulders, like all of the time.
Yeah.
And I think what I would like to change is that parenting would be more of a kind of community kind of thing, that, you know, where like they do in other cultures, like where it does take a village to raise the child. And if you don't have the village, you know, that there would be some kind of just better support out there for people, so that the areas that you may be lacking, somebody else could kind of step forward and kind of step in with that. And I saw a thing on Instagram the other day, which really, really stuck with me. And it was talking about how parents have such guilt over kind of the way that their children are and the traits that they have and the traits that they grow up with. And it was saying that basically it's kind of scientifically proven that the way that you are as a person is already in you when you're born. And this kind of this saying that is kind of that we all hear about your child is like a blank canvas that you have to write on, and it's not really true. Like a lot of the traits that people have are innate to them, they are born with them. And so this guilt that we carry is so misplaced. And this Instagram thing was saying that, you know, you don't blame a shepherd for the actions of the sheep. Like the way that the sheep are is the way that they are. And although there is elements of nurture that go into raising a person, you know, there is also a lot of nature at play as well. And I think that if we could just kind of take the individualism out of parenting and work together more and have more support in place and stop placing so much responsibility, so much blame, so much guilt onto parents, everything would just feel so much. I think like there's just so much pressure that I don't think needs to be there.
No. The pressure's overwhelming, isn't it? Like I find the responsibility of being a parent is one of the heaviest things that I carry. And it is just overwhelming, and it's like the life admin that comes with it as well, isn't it? And I love what you've said there about the village aspect of like other people being able to teach them stuff. And because at the end of the day, we can't do everything physically, and as a person we don't know everything, we can't do everything. And having other people there that can pick up the bits that you can't do, like how amazing would that be for our children? Like just having a whole community that all work together.
That's it. And it would kind of model for them as well that you can't expect one person to be able to do everything all at once. And the way that we kind of will raise our children, I think, is based on a way of life that doesn't exist anymore. Like, you know, we're still expected to do all of the things that people were doing, especially women were doing with 60, 70, 80 years ago, when they weren't also going out to work and they weren't also responsible for 50% of the family income. You know, we're still expected to live in a way that we're not actually living anymore. And something needs to change.
And I find as well I mean, I don't know if it was like this before, but from a lot of parents that I speak to and posts I see and stuff, is we're so scared of other people having to tell our children. Or I see so many, you know, like your local groups on Facebook, and it's like a child's done this, and then parents don't like it if someone else tells their child or sets a boundary, or do you know what I mean? But sometimes like that's got to be kind of that the whole like the village ethos, it's everyone working together, isn't it? And that's kind of taking that away, and it's putting all the pressure back on yourself. Do you know what I mean? I'm not explaining that very clearly.
I do know what you mean. Yeah, definitely. I just think there'd be so much to be gained from more community and more support in general to be out there, because it is just such a lot, isn't it, for one, even two people, like, especially, and that's without adding in kind of additional kind of challenges as well with kind of neurodivergence and all other things. Like, it's just and there's so many others now as well, I think, that don't have family support like may have been the case kind of now. Like, families are more spread out now. There's you know, there's families that, you know, grandparents are working into their 70s, like, you know, they're not available to help out in a hands-on way quite as much anymore. Like, there isn't the same village, and something's got to give. Like, it needs to be addressed. Why?
I agree. Right. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we finish? Any other comments? Anything?
I don't think so. Just, I never know what to say to that kind of thing. I just would maybe add that if anyone has listened to this who has a child with kind of gender questioning or anything like that, I know it can be a really lonely, isolating experience, and it can be really worrying, especially at the start. So I'm always happy to chat to people who are kind of going through it or unsure about it, because when I first found myself in that situation, the very first thing I did was to kind of go onto Google and try to find advice and support, and there was very little kind of out there. So I just would like to let people know that, you know, I'm open to having a chat with people and kind of signposting them to the support that I found and things like that, if that's any help to anybody.
Amazing. And what I'll do is I'll obviously add like your Instagram and everything into the description as well, so if people need to find you, then they can go straight from that.
Oh, fab. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to talk to you.
I'm still like, oh my God.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been really lovely.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow, review and share with other parents you know. You can now listen on Apple, Spotify, Amazon and Google. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please get in touch via any of my social media channels, website or email.